Hello friends, for today's video we're going to be doing another new fantasy releases wrap up, and the three books we'll be discussing would be The Devils, The Art of Vanishing, and Of Flame and Fury. As always, there will be timestamps in the description bar down below in case you'd like to skip ahead to any one specific book or reference back to it at a future date, and then also all of these books will be linked in case you'd like to check them out for yourself. Before jumping into it, a huge thank you to Elliot for working with me on today's video. With the landscape of fantasy ever changing and so many genres becoming popular in their own right, many of us have identified that fantasy romance no longer really feels like simply a subgenre of fantasy, but rather a genre in its own right. It very much stands out on its own. When people are seeing the label of fantasy, they are looking for something oftentimes different than when they see the label of fantasy romance. So what I appreciate about this book box is it's recognizing that fantasy romance is its own genre. There are different things even within that genre that different readers are looking for, and that's what their entire book box is dedicated to. So the way it works is it's similar in format to Book of the Month. You're going to have 3 different exclusive special editions every single month, and then you can choose to get all of the books if you'd like. You can choose one of the books, you can skip, you can even pause sometimes if you need to, and then pick up your subscription again in the future. And they have a lot of variety, so they're going to have books that are a little bit more on the mild side all the way up to the exceptionally spicy side, and that way there's a lot of variety even within the fantasy romance. And what I really appreciate is that it feels sometimes like we just have a lack of clarity in the books that we're picking up, and we often try to kind of throw that feedback into the ether, hoping somebody will pick up on it and recognize that fantasy romance is, as noted, its own genre. So I really am grateful that this book box is doing that. A little bit about the books that are going to be available for August, as well as getting to see the special edition features as well. So first we have In the Veins of the Drowning. I have read this, I've quite enjoyed this, I will be talking about this very soon. And I really am glad that they did a special edition of this one, and the edges, as you can see, very much match the cover of the story. Another potential selection is Arcana Academy. This is by an author that I have checked out before. This was on my anticipated releases, so I was really excited to see that this was an option as well. I believe there's going to be aspects to it that are more dark academia leaning. Once again, the sprayed edges really nicely go along with what we see here on the front. With the first two, as noted, I read the first one, and then the other one is an anticipated release, so I should be getting around to that one pretty soon. And what's exciting is this last one actually was brought to my attention because of Elliot. I think this one would have gone out of my radar otherwise, and it's called Wrath of the Dragons. I really like this purple color. But we have, once again, edges that match. You open it up and you're going to see in this one in particular there's this really beautiful map here on the front, as well as some very, very beautiful artwork on the back. This one has a little special feature to its naked hardback. When you take the sleeve off, it's a little bit hard to see, but there's actually designs on this to make it look more like almost dragon scales. And a couple of other little fun features is that you do get a bookmark with your book box, and on the back it says welcome to the realm. Additionally, you also are going to get some fun stickers. So if you're somebody who likes to journal as you read, or you like keeping a notebook and that's where you put all of your thoughts, they will have a lot of fun little stickers in their boxes as well. These editions are limited editions, so if you are interested in any of these, you can get your first box for $19.99 using the code HEATWAVE. I have all of this information in the description bar as well, so that you have ease of access, and then I'll have a link where you can just directly go to that in case you'd like to check it out for yourself. But again, a really huge thank you to Elliot. The easier it is for people to find what they're looking for, the better it is for these stories and for the authors of these stories to ensure that the books that they've poured so much love and care into are finding the readers that are going to love them and appreciate them the most. I'm going to start with Of Flame and Fury, and this one I am really surprised because the synopsis for this one, in my opinion, does not really match what I found I got from the story. And I actually ended up kind of liking the story more than I thought I would because it wasn't quite like what the synopsis says. That said, I do think that some people are going to expect something very different and then ultimately have the opposite experience where they're going to end up being disappointed. So typically when I do these new fantasy releases wrap-ups, I don't just read off the synopsis to you, but I want to read the synopsis off and then kind of bounce off of that and say when I agree and when I don't necessarily agree with how the synopsis is presenting the book. So it says, Fourth Wing meets Iron Widow in this enemies to lovers young adult romantic fantasy by debut author Michaela Bridge, the hottest must-read of the summer. On an island built from ash and shrouded in fire, Phoenix racing is a sport just as profitable as it is deadly. 17-year-old Kelvara and her team of underdogs, the Crimson Howlers, are desperate to win the annual races and the fortune that comes with it. But the Howlers need a new bride, which leads Kel to join forces with Warren Coopers, an arrogant rival she can't get out of her head. As tensions rise on and off the track, Kel's home is mistakenly burned down, and she's forced to take a job from a mysterious tech mogul with an unsettling interest in her Phoenix Savita. This sets in motion a conspiracy that threatens everyone Kel cares for, especially Coop, for whom her embers of resentment are quickly igniting into something dangerously new. Heart-pounding pages full of steamy romance, fiery confessions, political scheming, and volatile magic culminate in a final twist readers will never see coming. I have to say, I am kind of amused that they tell you in the synopsis, like, there's a twist. Because typically, even mentioning whether there is a twist in a more formal sense, not like, oh, there's so many twists and turns, or there's so many reveals, but just formally saying there's a twist people will never see coming, I think is a bizarre thing to say in your synopsis. But point is, there were multiple aspects of that synopsis that lead you to believe that this is basically a fantasy romance book. I will say, I agree in the sense that it says it's a young adult romantic fantasy, in that I wouldn't categorize it as fantasy romance, as I do think that the plot isn't necessarily reliant upon the romantic elements of the story. I do think that the romantic elements were a subplot. So I would say that that's a more accurate representation than to just straight up call it fantasy romance. However, that synopsis, unless you disagree, I think leads people to believe that it's going to be this very steamy book, especially the comparison to Fourth Wing, and additionally saying that there's steamy scenes. There's some, I mean, it's young adult, and it's, I think, accurately marketed as young adult, and I would not categorize this in any fashion as being steamy. Not in the way that most people use that word to describe a lot of fantasy romance books. So, yes, there is a romantic subplot. I don't categorize this, though, as being that fantasy romance heavy. Anyway, it did kind of describe the synopsis to you in that setup, and I thought that the more engaging parts of the story were the fact that the character really wrestles with the idea of having to partner with that tech mogul, it's a phone. She doesn't want to have to do this, and there's a lot of mystery surrounding her family and what happened to them, and then the other people that are essentially on her team of these racers, they also have all of their own reasons why they're very desperate to actually attain some sense of comfort in their lives. So the motivations behind why they end up partnering with the tech mogul I found to be far more compelling than a lot of the other aspects that I feel like are being thrown out in the marketing, because it kind of taps into the deeper aspects of why people make the decisions that they make. And in this case, the character does not want anything to do with this corporation, and other teammates of hers are very hesitant as well. And obviously the synopsis, it explains that something happens to her home and now she doesn't really have a choice. And I liked that aspect of the story, the ways that when you are essentially at the bottom, we'll say, within this fantasy world, when you're an underdog, when you're somebody who doesn't have a safety net, then what options do you have, and that kind of moral compromise that you have to make in order just to survive. So I really liked those aspects of the story. The Phoenix racing components, I thought they were fun. I mean, the idea of this world where entertainment is so much more significant than the safety of the people participating in the entertainment, I think is something that I would compare to other stories besides something like Fourth Wing, because in this instance, it's commentary on the entire society as a whole, and then also you can obviously take that and think about it in context to our own history as well as present day, the way that we will be entertained no matter what. And we have it in our head like, well, the people that are participating in the entertainment, they're doing it willingly. And that's the part of the story that I think is where you have the contradictions of these people witnessing this entertainment think, oh, well, everybody's doing it willingly, so it's fine for us to enjoy this. But are they really that willing when a society is built upon basically taking advantage of people who are in very difficult circumstances? So all of those things I actually really quite enjoyed about the story. I think that the romantic subplot was fine. I wouldn't have described it as super steamy. I wouldn't say this is like a new favorite couple of mine necessarily, but it was fun. It was a fun story, and I'm kind of on the fence about whether I want to keep going, because it's one of those books where after sitting on it for a bit, I really found I was like, oh yeah, I had fun with that one. It was kind of just that action-packed adventure, the, corrupt corporation feel where you're always like, they're helping them right now, but there's no way that they don't have some ulterior motives, right? And so you're constantly questioning everything they do. When somebody from the company seems nice, you wonder, are they actually nice? Or is it that they're just trying to trick everybody? Or is it something in the middle where maybe they genuinely are nice, but they too are put in certain circumstances where they're being taken advantage of, and thus it pits people against each other. So I liked the kind of not knowing as you're progressing through the story. And the world is much more futuristic than what we typically see in fantasy, so I enjoyed the setting as well. And there are some other aspects that have to do with rebellion and people who are trying to push back. But what happens when the people trying to push back don't have the means to utilize technology to try and get their message out, to try and push back against all of the people that do have all of the money? So how do people's reputations get twisted? I thought all of that was a lot of fun. It's kind of more in the background, but I did appreciate those elements to it as well. So in general, if you are looking for just a fun, action-packed, kind of action movie feel sort of fantasy story, I feel like this one can fit the bill. I don't necessarily think all the thematic elements that I liked about it are the things that are shining brightly. Something like Blood Over Bright Haven wears its themes on its sleeve, and I think the themes are done really well and they go really in depth. I wouldn't say these ones have the most extraordinary amount of depth necessarily, because it does propel you forward pretty quickly, so I don't know that we always have the time to dig super deep, but I do think that they're present, and that elevated the book a little bit for me personally. Next up, we have The Devils. I did do an in-depth vlog for this one. If that's more your tune, you prefer things that go a little bit further in depth, then I'll have that linked. But this one, for me, was unfortunately a miss. The kind of main thing I consistently say, though, is that this is one of those types of stories where it definitely went for it, and I can absolutely understand why, if this is your style of humor and the way that you like the thematic elements coupled with very over-the-top things, whether it be the action, the dialogue, the characters, the violence, if you like that hybrid, that I 100% could see this working. I tried really hard to remove my love of Abercrombie's First Law world from the equation, because I didn't think it would be fair to try and expect this to be the same as that. I always want authors to feel free to explore different things and not have them feel beholden to the works that they have had in the past. I will say, though, that the other works have been more to my liking, and I did like the humor more in those as opposed to what we got here, because I do feel like it maybe was a little bit overdone for my taste. The setup for the story is that you have this ragtag group of a mix of human beings as well as some kind of monsters and creatures, and this group has been tasked with accompanying this young woman who everybody has declared is the Empress, who has been missing for years, and that they need to help her get to basically from point A to point B. And along the way, they are facing the brothers of this girl who do not want her to ascend to the throne and are thus sending all sorts of adversaries to face off against. And it has a somewhat repetitive feel to it, a little bit, because you have them traveling and them not really getting along, and it seems like everybody doesn't really want to be here, but they're magically bound to help this girl. And then they end up having to fight some other monsters, and they have to fight other people. Then they move from that point to a next point, and then rinse and repeat. It's kind of a very similar format for quite a while. And then things do start to shift a little bit, and then that's when you kind of have everything come to a head, and it's a really explosive ending. I do think that's hard to accomplish when you've already had explosive action throughout, to then have this ending that feels really climactic. I do think that was accomplished really well. And there's so much commentary on the ridiculous nature of institutions, the fracturing of various institutions, and how at the end of the day, it's oftentimes about wealth and power and greed, and the way that people put certain restrictions upon others, and they feel emboldened to do so based off of the things that they feel are righteous and correct. And then you have everybody else who is just trying to navigate life, and how sometimes the people we deem as monsters maybe aren't really always as monstrous as the people who have given them these labels. There's a lot of commentary that I really enjoyed, and there were some very quotable moments about this book. It was very, very fun. It's just not the kind of fun that I want all the time, meaning it was kind of a long book. I actually think maybe if we had cut it down, I would have maybe enjoyed it for what it was a little bit more, because I do think that my main criticism is that it's repetitive. And so if it's repetitive and it's long, then the repetition obviously repeats over and over and over and over again. It's not just like a couple times here and there. So it didn't quite work for me. I do appreciate, though, the leap that Abercrombie made in going from his other works to this. And I also appreciate the commentary that's within it. And I do really like authors trying to balance out the heavier with the more exciting and fun and over the top. I actually do want, I think, for more authors to give that a try. I'm just very picky about that balance. I've kind of maintained that throughout the years I've been reviewing various different books, and then over on my side channel reviewing other kinds of media. I just am very, very picky about the camp factor against gore, violence, action, all that other stuff. If it's not quite right, then it ends up not working at all. It's kind of exactly hit or miss. Very rarely is it something in the middle for me. So this one didn't work for me, but I absolutely could see it working for so many other people. And then last for today, we have The Art of Vanishing. The setup for this story is that you follow this young woman who works in a museum, and she's very enamored by all of the artwork here, not realizing that the artwork is actually filled with people trapped within their frames, and they are not able to escape the canvas they exist within. But there's one young man in particular who finds himself fascinated by this young woman who is cleaning all of the museum, and he really wishes that there was some way he could reach out and get to know her. And then one day she finds herself stumbling into this painting, and from there these two end up engaging in this kind of whirlwind friendship and maybe something a little bit more. However, the story isn't just about navigating real life versus this fantasy world that actually feels like it's our own world in a different time because it's rooted in the painter of that time, and thus the character can kind of explore history in a sense, but it just feels so whimsical and magical. It's not just about those aspects. It's not just necessarily like a portal fantasy that you can go in and out of. You actually do have a lot of questions about kind of existential boredom in a sense. This is a theme that I see present in other stories like Cowboy Bebop, for example, which I think is present in the character who exists within this painting. And also the way that that can lead to depression. It can lead to not really knowing what you want out of life, not embracing life. So I did appreciate those thematic elements. And then with our female character that exists within our world, the one who ended up going into the painting, this character, I don't want to say too much about what she's dealing with because it is somewhat something that you discover as you read on, and very much how that discovery plays out is rooted in how she first presents herself. So I don't want to reveal too much, but something that she kind of consistently keeps saying is that even though she's a really young woman, she's early 20s, she kind of keeps talking about having to grow up too fast. And you get glimpses here and there about her not really seeming comfortable talking too much about her family and her private life. So you do have this natural curiosity that builds. And when she goes into this painting, she is treating it as though it's just purely an escape from her own reality. And she seems so happy because she seems like she can actually be vibrant and free. And you wonder, what is it that she feels like she has to be vibrant here against, and what's going on in her personal life. I do feel like a lot of the thematic elements tied to the characters and the navigating of life in general, I appreciated their presence. I did feel like the book played out in a way that was kind of odd plot-wise. It had a lot of potential to be really powerful, and I think it had a lot of potential to be really, really beautiful and poignant. And it had some interesting turns in the plot where it felt like we were going to be focusing on one particular aspect, or maybe a few different things, facets of their personalities and their lives. It seemed like, okay, this is what we're going to dive into, because it's not that long of a book. And then all of a sudden we get this different plot line that kind of incorporates a different character, and you're like, oh, okay. And then it sort of really quickly mentions something else, and you're like, whoa, okay, I guess that's what we're doing. And then it ends. And it was odd. It was kind of an odd reading experience. Perhaps if we had reshaped some of the latter portions of the story and then really sat in the things that we were establishing in the middle portion, because I think the middle portion is when you go from everything feels happy and joyful to, oh, okay, now we're getting serious about these characters' lives, and they're forced to reckon with what they have done in their lives or what they haven't done in their lives and what they want out of their lives. And if we had just sat in that, I think for quite a while, and then we formed some kind of resolution, if we had formed some kind of resolution through a lot of introspection, reflection, I think I would have appreciated it a little bit more. It almost felt like the last portion felt like it almost came across like the book didn't think it was engaging enough and thus had to kind of throw in some other things. And for me, that actually kind of took away from what I wanted more of within the middle portions. Hopefully nothing I've said is going to dissuade you if you think it sounds like a really good story. If it sounds like something that you would really connect with, especially the quieter character moments, and also with the backdrop of this sort of artistic setting and a lot of appreciation for the arts. If all of that sounds good, then I would say still give this one a try, but it didn't quite end up working for me. That's it though for this new fantasy releases wrap up. As noted, I'll have all of these linked in case you'd like to check them out. If you have thoughts of your own that you would like to mention in the comments, feel free to do so. If you have recommendations for people, if they liked one, they might like something else, then of course, as always, I would love to know your suggestions. Thanks so much for watching though. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.